people might want to arrive, because we are literally just at 7 o'clock, and you know, it is Zoom, but we do have a little bit of grace for people to arrive a couple of minutes late. So forgive me, I'm just going to delay a little bit to this start as we just wait to make sure that we've got everybody in the doors. But we are really looking forward to kickstarting this discussion in a few moments. This innovative built solutions for churches conversation. I'm really looking forward to introducing you to the panel and who we've got here today. I'm hoping you are looking forward to it as well. We are now up to 48 participants, which is really good. And as I said, I'm just going to wait a few more moments for a few more people to come on in. Just to make you aware, this is being recorded, and it is also going to be live streamed to YouTube as well. So if anybody is uncomfortable with that, please do keep yourself on mute. Please do keep your video off. But other than that, we are just going to wait a few more moments for a few more people to come on through the virtual doors, as it were. But I am really looking forward to getting this kicked off in a few moments. Forgive my waffle for this moment, but I'm just kind of waiting a moment to get everybody into the room, and I will introduce us all properly in a few moments. It's looking like it's being well attended so far. We've got 59 people in the room, as far as I can see, which is exciting. Hopefully just one more will round us up to 60. There we are, there they are. So we are looking forward to getting started. And I am going to, in fact, introduce myself properly now. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for putting up with my rambles just for a little moment there. And I'm really delighted to see so many lovely faces, so many people I recognise, and others new to me as well. So my name, if you don't know me, is Jessie Wild, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Bristol Housing Festival, and we are helping to host this event for you this evening. There are lots and lots of other people that have been absolutely essential to the organisation of this event, including the All Churches Trust. And we just want to say a massive thank you to everybody who has been involved. For those of you that missed me when I was saying it, this is going to be recorded, and it is being streamed live on YouTube as we speak. So do feel free to keep your video off and keep yourself muted if you're not comfortable with being recorded or seen on YouTube. But I'm really excited about this event because as part of the Archbishop of Canterbury's commission on housing church community, this Innovative Built Solutions for Churches programme was created to assist churches in responding effectively and creatively to the housing crisis. So over the last 12 months, LiveShare, who we'll hear from later, have been working with 7 different churches, 3 of which we're going to hear from in a few moments, to support them on their journey to create affordable homes, and often improving community spaces and creatively using their land and assets. So this evening, we're going to hear from the Bishop of Kensington, the Right Rev Dr Graham Tomlin. We're going to hear from Marvin Rees, the Mayor of Bristol. We're going to hear from Rebecca Stockman, who's from LiveShare, and then also some of the participating church leaders that have been part of this. And I won't steal their stories. I'm going to let them do all the introductions themselves. But hopefully this will give us a chance as well to challenge us about thinking through what steps we might be able to take to make something happen in our own communities. So this evening, this whole event is going to be an hour and a half. We're going to hear from the panel first, and then we're going to move into a panel discussion and Q&A. You will notice that you can't unmute yourselves. That is deliberate, forgive us, but please do, if you have any questions, pop them in the chat box, and then Jessie Carter, who you may be able to find somewhere on this big screen, will be collating those questions and sending them over to me so I can put them to the panel. So we have already received some questions ahead of time, so do feel free to add your questions to the box, and if we can't get to your question, do forgive us, but we will get through as many questions as possible. Then as we hit kind of 8 o'clock, I'm going to formally close this session, this section all together like this. And then there's going to be an opportunity for breakout rooms where it's a chance to chat informally really with other people that are on this call, to start to have a conversation about what we can do and start to reflect on some of the things that we've heard here. Each of those breakout rooms is going to have a representative from either a church that's involved in the Innovative Build Solutions programme or from someone you've seen on the panel. And we'd really encourage you to stick around for these breakout rooms to have part of that conversation. And then you will be able to leave the meeting from those breakout rooms. So I'm going to formally close it. around about 8ish, and then move us into breakout rooms. When you finished in the room, you can just leave from there. So don't forget, I'm about to introduce the panel, but don't forget, as you're hearing from each of the panel members, please do pop your questions in the box as we go. Now, I'm not going to speak for much longer, I promise, and I'm going to try not to get involved in between each of the panelists introducing themselves. I'm going to just let that run through. We're going to start with the Right Reverend Dr Graham Tomlin, move on to Mayor Marvin Rees, then hear from Rebecca Stockman, followed by Rowena Paling, Andrew Stansbury and Bill Bewley. So without much further ado, may I hand over to Graham Tomlin.
Thanks, Jessie, very much indeed, and very good to see you all tonight. Just to introduce myself, I'm Graham Tomlin. I'm the Bishop of Kensington in London, but I'm actually from Bristol. I was born and brought up in Bristol. I'm a proper Bristolian. You can hear it a little bit in my voice. Still got a little bit of the Bristol accent, but most of it's been lost. But there you go. Anyway, it's very good to be with you tonight. I got involved in housing because the Grenfell Tower fire happened in one of the parishes that I'm responsible for. And I was involved on the day and in the aftermath of the fire. And ever since then, have become quite interested in housing. And as a result of that, I was asked to be the vice chair of the Archbishop of Canterbury's Commission on Housing, Church and Community, which has been a great privilege to be involved in that over the last couple of years. And just in these couple of minutes at the beginning, I would like to say something about why the church should be involved in housing. You might be interested in this little booklet that we've just brought out. It's a Grow booklet called Why the Church Should Care About Housing. That might be a way to pick it up. But just to kind of summarize some of those things, why should the church care about housing? 3 very quick reasons. 1, because home is a basic human need. There are some issues in society that affect some people, but not others. But home affects absolutely everybody. All of us, pretty well all of us, have some kind of place we call home, whether it's a mansion or whether it's a flat or something in between. And having a home is about basic human dignity. And if it matters to us, surely it matters to God. And if it matters to God, it matters to his church. The second reason is because, actually, when you think about it, the Christian story is about home. If you actually think about the story of the Bible, it's the story of the human race being given a home to live in, a garden in which they could live. But it's then the story of the abuse of that garden and the abuse of the relationship with God who gave it, and the human race being cast out of that garden, becoming homeless, as it were, out into a hostile world. But then it's the story of the long journey back home again, through the history of Israel, the coming of Christ at the heart of that story. And right at the end of the Bible, we get that amazing verse in Revelation 21. See, the home of God is among mortals. He will dwell with them. They will be his peoples, and God himself will be with them. Now that story, as we understand it in the commission, we've translated that into 5 key values as to what good homes are about. And we say they are sustainable, they're safe, they're stable, they're sociable, and they're satisfying. Now we can unpack those a little bit later on if you like, but that's our framework that maps onto that Christian story. So the gospel is about home. And there is a way, it seems to me, of telling, good homes tell the story of the gospel in bricks and mortar. And then one last point, good housing builds community, because home is about having a stake in the society that you're part of. It means you can make a contribution to your community. In other words, good housing that is sustainable, safe, stable, sociable, satisfying, enables you to play your part in a community and enables good social engagement. So there's my 3 reasons for why the church should be interested in housing, because it's a basic human need, because the gospel is all about home and house. And then lastly, good housing builds community.
Thank you. And I has been real honoured to be part of the commission, and I'll just share 3 reflections. Why housing? Since getting elected, before getting elected, we identified housing as the key policy tool for the city. Many of the services we end up spending money on and time on happen because people haven't had good, stable homes in the first years of their lives, affordable homes in mixed, balanced communities. And it goes on from what Graham has just said. It's not just the house, it's not just the unit. It is about how we create the conditions in which communities and human relationships can form. And we've seen through COVID, actually, some of the weaknesses in our society exposed, and those have been about pre-existing health conditions, overcrowded housing, social isolation, and building quality homes in communities is one of the ways we can build resilience into the future of our communities. Shopping trips, for example, by neighbours. So we need a city system to supply people with food, but when neighbours are shopping for neighbours, we begin to build that strength into our communities. That makes for strong societies that are both just and, which goes with it, cheaper to run, to be perfectly frank as well. Secondly, housing is key not only to those individual and community level justice issues, but global justice. One of the things I've pointed out to some of the kind of activist community in the city is that the kind of homes we build and where we build them will be one of the biggest determinants of the price the planet has to pay for our rapid urbanization. Cities are growing. That's just going to happen. The world population is growing. People are moving to cities. Bristol is at about 465,000. We anticipate the city growing by over 90,000 in the next 25 years. That's just going to happen. We have a housing crisis today. We have to build homes for those people in the future. Not building homes is not an option, but we clearly want to build homes that in and of themselves are zero carbon, smart, do not require masses of energy. And we have to build them in locations that allow for active travel. If we build them 6-7 miles away from any employment zones or retail offer, people will be dependent on transport systems. So we have to redesign our cities, the right kind of homes in the right places. It will be key to so many of our other social challenges. The third point I make is, and I'm really pleased, and we took this challenge on early on the commission, was that this cannot just be about people ragging on the government, and ragging on public authorities to get it done. I think there's a real weak version of activism that says, I'm an activist if I just tell everyone how bad the world is. Particularly for the church, if you're going to point out what the problem is, the fullness of the prophetic position is also to put a solution, right? Joseph did that. Many of the prophets did it, right? So I think the fact that this is about the framework, the way the country works, but it's also about the church saying, oh, actually, we have land and we have resource. What's our part in a delivery? Because if I'm a Christian, but I would deliver the challenge anyway, if I'm lobbied by the church, one of my first points is, well, how did you do it, right? You got the Holy Spirit, you got supernatural power. Show me what you did to solve these major global crises at the moment, and then please enlighten me. But if you haven't solved it, then there's a challenge about how we come alongside leaders to be part of the solution as well.
Thanks, Marvin. So I'm Rebecca. It's really good to be here. I'm from LiveShare. Last year, we worked with 7 churches across the country. So Bromley, Bristol, Blackburn, Croydon, Cornwall and Walsall, to be specific. The work was funded by the All Churches Trust and commissioned by the Commission. We provided support and guidance to churches over last year as they took action to create homes using their land and assets. So what that looked like practically was things like vision workshops, writing communication strategies, options reports and partnership agreements. Alongside that, we wrote a guide for others that's online now, hosted by Housing Justice, alongside some case studies from the churches as well as other churches that have also created housing. Our key learning points, I think, from this really were the need to take small steps. Development can be easily overwhelming, and I think there's a need to break it down to little bits that are possible. The need to reach out, connect with communities, speak to each other and not think you've got it all sorted. I think it's really helpful and you get the best solutions like that. And the last one was maintaining a flexible focus. So being clear about what you want to get to, but not too fussed about the route, and not getting too hung up on the process, but yeah, keeping an eye on the goal really. And that's it from me. So I'll pass over to Rowena.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. I'm Rowena and I'm representing one of the churches which has been working with LiveShare, and we've been really grateful for the support that we've received. I'm the Vice Dean of Blackburn Cathedral, which is in Lancashire in the northwest of England. And we're committed very much here at the Cathedral to using all of our buildings creatively. So actually at the moment our crypt is a COVID vaccination centre. And it's always been part of the story of the Cathedral cathedral. Just as Bishop Graham said, it's been part of the story of the church and the people of faith. It's been part of our story here at the cathedral to use our buildings and for our buildings to be situated in the heart of a community for their use. But I think that our specific project, which I'll come on to in just a second, is really about matching up resources and need, about connecting the right people. It's a little bit cheesy to say, but so often problems are actually opportunities, and that's very much what we've experienced here. So the situation that we have is an empty building, which used to be a set of diocesan offices, but which has been vacant for a few years when they moved out to an out-of-town venue. And we all know that sometimes buildings can be a drain on resources, so it looks like a problem in itself. But we also have an issue within the town of Blackburn, which is that we are what is called a dispersal area for people who are in the asylum process. And there are some very, very specific housing needs around that. Often words such as refugees and asylum seekers get used interchangeably, but they're actually quite specific and their needs are different. And what we find here in Blackburn is that there are a group of people who have been through the asylum process and then they are granted refugee status, so they're able to remain here in the UK, but they lose all of their benefits and the housing which is provided, and they have just 4 weeks to find somewhere to settle. That's the real housing need that we find here in Blackburn. And so we felt a Christian responsibility to respond to that. So again, it's matching up those two issues, our building, the need that's there. But also crucially, this isn't something about doing a ministry to a community. This is about recognizing that this is our community and we are part of it. Often with cathedrals, there are kind of strange assumptions about who goes to them and how grand they must be. It's not the case at all. Cathedrals are incredibly eclectic congregations, as many other churches are too. But a number of the people who worship here week by week, day by day, are people who have themselves either been through the asylum seeker process or who are in it at the moment. So it's serving the needs of our own community. And our learning from that, I guess, is mainly about perseverance. It's about celebrating the connections which have already been made, but it's also, because we haven't yet finished, about persisting in knocking on the doors even now. So many thanks to LiveShare for their support, and I'll hand on to the next church.
Thanks, Rowena. My name's Andrew. I'm Associate Pastor at Hope Community Church in Bristol. And we sort of stumbled into working with LiveShare because we've got a relatively modest parcel of land next door to the church. And we had begun, a few people begun to have an idea of whether we could build a single person dwelling on that parcel of land, affordable housing, for a targeted individual that we've been working with for over 10 years as a church, to who's come out of prison, who's come out of addiction and was homeless at one point. And we've worked with him. He's now working for the church as a caretaker. And we felt like now was the right time to look at trying to create affordable housing for him, and longer term as part of our strategy for helping marginalised people reintegrate meaningfully into society and giving them a helping hand to do that. In the area of the city that we live, affordable housing is totally non-existent for people coming out of prison or who maybe would struggle to hold down a full-time job. So I was pointing in the direction of the Innovative Built Solutions program, and we put in an application, and the LiveShare guys have really helped us to understand how plausible it is to do something meaningful, high quality, even on quite a small bit of land, and using modern methods of construction for us, because access is very hard to the bit of land that we're looking at. Using a panelized system means that we can basically, a bit like a flat pack home, we can really make something through bringing it in without the need for cranes or for any really high-end construction site. And that was a game changer for us. I think before then we'd sort of assumed that we wouldn't be able to do anything because of the restrictions of the site. So we're looking at about 40 meters squared, And because using those modern methods of construction, it should be carbon neutral, it should be high quality, it should be very low energy demanding, and should be affordable. And I think for us looking forward, because the occupant will be paying rent, the finance of it initially looked like a massive barrier, but actually, if you look at a way of attracting funding that you could pay off over a number of years, then it becomes very, very manageable, and actually not a big initial outlay for us as a church potentially. We're still at the early stages, still looking at the best way of getting the process done. But our main learning, I think, is that, you know, it's in many ways a small project, and it could feel like it's insignificant, but actually hearing others speak, connecting with LiveShare and the wider narrative, I think it's about trying to play our part, no matter how small the land, to try to contribute to the solution to this housing crisis wherever we can. So that would be our story and our learning points.
So I'm Bill Bewley. I live in Keswick, which is in the northern end of the Lake District National Park. I got into being involved with affordable housing because I was chairing a series of meetings that was organized by churches together in Keswick. We looked at the town council, we looked at the elderly, we looked at the youth, and we looked at how Keswick related to the world we're in through environmental issues, fair trade, and the like. And at every single meeting, the lack of affordable homes in Keswick came up as one of the main concerns. So at the end, like a fool, I said, oh, I lead a group that will look at that. And about 18 months later, we formed Keswick Community Housing Trust. And since we were formed, our first project was 11 houses at the back of a Church of England church, St. John's, Keswick. It was an extension to a graveyard, and it wasn't very suitable for burial, but it was perfectly suitable for houses. We were delighted with the support we got from the Church of England, because at times the local vicar had to speak to his trustees to remind them of the right that we as Christians have to provide homes for our community. Sometimes trustees
Oh, Bill may have frozen. We'll just give it. Oh,
get very concerned. Sorry.
Keep going, Bill. You're back now.
Okay. So anyway, with the encouragement of the local vicar, we built 11 houses. And since then, we were given a disused toilet block, which we made into 4 flats. Then we bought 22 houses from a developer, which were all affordable. And our latest project, which is taking all my hair away, turning it grey, is 4 houses at the back of a Methodist church. It's not the Methodists that are giving me grey hairs, it's just services and a whole lot of other things. So we have developed a site, we have renovated a building, we bought houses from a developer, and we've demolished a church hall and rebuilt it. So we're pretty knowledgeable about the different forms of development. So maybe later on you'll have a question for me. I suppose the biggest lesson I've learned, or we have learned, is perseverance, because you do get setbacks, but there's always a way around a setback. Either you have to step further back and then negotiate the difficulty, or you can speak to somebody and then a door opens. But you will get setbacks, but usually there's a way through. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all our panelists, and thank you particularly for sticking to your very tight 2 to 3 minute time window. Really appreciate that. It gives us loads of time for Q&A. So just as a reminder, if you do have any burning questions, please do pop them in the chat box. And I'm going to start here with some of the questions that we had previously. Marvin, if I may come to you first, there's been a question about how do we get the support from local authorities? So thinking about local authorities more generally, as well as Bristol specifically, if a church wanted to do a project, how do they go about building those relationships with their local authority and getting their support?
Well, I think sometimes that sounds more mysterious than it is. I mean, undoubtedly there'll be some who will be suspicious of faith groups. That's just reality. I've been on the receiving end of it myself, being a Christian. But on the whole, local authorities want to build houses, and I think people who turn up with solutions will receive will receive an open hand. Certainly in Bristol, that's been our approach. That the church is turning up with solutions and resources and expertise and commitment. Fantastic. So we take them up on the offer. And I think that there's a similar approach across the core cities, the 10 biggest cities across the UK. But I'm sure that if you have questions about, as told, you run into difficulties. If you have questions about how to bring a piece of land forward for development, talking to the authority early and just setting out the scale of the offer is one way. But also in networks like this, there are people like Jez Sweetland and the Bristol Housing Festival, yourself as well, who can also come in and, having been there and done that, to support people bring their schemes to a place where they feel comfortable presenting them.
Thanks so much. And Rowena or Bill, Andrew, how has that been your experience, or what has been your experience as you've engaged with local authorities? Perhaps Rowena, I could come to you first.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in many ways it's actually about building on a relationship of trust, which we've already got. And the sooner you can engage with your local authority and other partners, the better, really, over anything. And as that relationship builds, then actually starting to talk about projects that you've got will be much easier and much more natural. We've had great support from our local authority here in Blackburn with Darwin, because we're on the same page. We know what the needs are. They know what the needs are. So there's absolutely no conflict or mystery in this at all.
Brilliant, thank you. And Bill, any further comments from you?
Yes, I think it's absolutely essential to build up a good relation with councillors. When we were first talking to our local town council, there was a certain suspicion as why should a group of amateurs get involved in quite a difficult project. But very soon they realized, as has just been said, we're both on the same page. We both want the same. I think probably you need to be very sure that you demonstrate your desire to do something for the community, but you make sure you bring as many as possible with you. I've got to say that until our houses started to believe that we would ever do anything, and would very much question why would a group get involved in building houses. As soon as our first project was completed, is wonderful in the town and continues to be so. But it's very important to liaise with local authorities.
Thanks so much. Graham, may I come to you? I've had a couple of questions that I'd like to direct your way, if that's okay. The first is about why should churches bother? If they've got a parcel of land, why should they bother engaging with the idea of affordable housing or working with a local authority? And alongside that, if they wanted to, what would be your best recommendation for how to get started?
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. I think, I mean, why do we do this? I mean, I think, as I was saying earlier on, I mean, one of the things is it's one of the most urgent sort of social needs we have in our society at the moment. I was talking with one of our vicars recently, and was in a quite a sort of deprived area of London, and he was saying how it's almost all of the pastoral issues that he comes across in his parish have some connection with housing or poor housing. Whether it's overcrowded housing, whether it's sort of poor, bad quality housing, or people feeling unsafe in their homes, or families just not being able to kind of rest quietly because their homes aren't secure. There's so many of the kind of issues that people were having were actually related to the homes in which they live. Our homes make a massive impact upon our lives. And we're probably more aware of that than ever right now, because we've been spending an awful lot of time in our homes. over the last year. And we've become very aware of how, if you live in a nice, comfortable home, lockdown has not been too bad for you. If you live in a very small, tiny house and you're trying to kind of homeschool your children and it's crowded and there's no privacy, lockdown is a nightmare. And so our homes have a massive impact upon our lives. And therefore, it seems to be such a crucial thing that the church, if we're interested in our communities and the thriving of our communities, we should get involved in them. And I think the other thing is this simple point that I do believe it's possible to, as I was saying earlier on, to tell the story of the gospel in bricks and mortar. Actually, that houses that give people a taste of something that is sustainable, that actually, works with the environment, that is safe, a safe place where you can live, that's stable, enables people to put down roots in a community and feel part of it, something that's sociable, enables people to kind of mix in together, invite their neighbors in, and something that's actually satisfying. You come home to and you enjoy it. That's part of God's will for us as human beings. Now that actually tells the story of the gospel from creation through to new creation. If you want to know more about it, just check out the little Grow booklet. And therefore, this is an integral way of telling the story, giving people a taste of the home that we're invited to one day in the new creation, where God makes his home with us. And so it seems to me this isn't something kind of, to one side that, is just a marginal thing. It could be a fantastic way of engaging with our communities, meeting real social need, and actually bearing witness to the gospel that is at the heart of the Christian faith. So those are some of the reasons why. Where you would start with it, I think one place I'd go to is, and we'll put the link in the chat in a moment. We developed a whole series of blogs as part of the commission, profiling a lot of different ways in which churches have got involved in housing need locally. It could be what Bill's talking about, using some church land to develop affordable housing. It could be just becoming aware of housing need in your local area, having a drop-in place where people can come and share their problems with housing and talk to people in the housing department of local communities. It could be just advocating with local politicians for affordable housing being a priority. There's lots of different ways in which that can be done. And so first step, I'd say just check out these blogs, go through them and think, yeah, that could work for us. We could do that. And we'll put the link in the chat in a moment.
Thanks so much, Graham. So Rebecca, just following on from that, there's been a question. It says, we don't have any money, but we do have ideas and energy. So just following on from what Graham has said, is there anything you would add in response to that in terms of how to get started? And who do you partner with if you don't have money, but you've got all that kind of ideas and energy?
Yeah, I just think money doesn't necessarily need to be a problem. It sounds like a ridiculous thing to say, but I think once you start putting things together, ideas become investable often. If it was me starting from scratch, I would be looking at doing some research, understanding what needs are in my area. So often churches do know, but I think I would be talking to the people that are talking to others. So often local councillors, MPs, advice centres, that kind of thing, and really find out where the pain points are. Often they're connected to housing. So if you have a heart for housing, often you can see where the correlation is. But I would start there, and then start working up an idea about actually where do those pain points match with the resources that you might have. So is it around a bit of land? Is it an underused hall? Are you able to buy a house, and so on, and work up a vision. I think a compelling vision for what you want to do and why you want to do it and the impact you want is inherently fundable. So being really clear about that from the outset is helpful. Sometimes having money at the start is unhelpful because it drives the purpose more than the will. So yeah, don't give up just because there's no money.
Brilliant. And you nicely touched on something there, which I'd like to take us off on a tangent into, if that's okay.
Could I just say there?
Oh, yes, go on, Bill.
Yeah, just to say, community shares is one very good way of getting money. We only raised £60,000 out of Keswick, but that released a £1 million building fund. So even a relatively small amount can make a huge difference when building affordable homes.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. So just moving on slightly, and I'd like to pick up on a theme that's coming out in a couple of the questions, but also something that has been picked up by a number of our speakers so far, and it's thinking about the kind of the needs and the end user. So Andrew, I'd love to come to you first, but you could, because you mentioned it specifically in yours, but how do you, obviously you had a very specific kind of end goal, if that makes sense, but how do you go about working out that is the best use of that piece of land, and it's the best person for that house, or the best kind of what's the word I'm looking for, the best solution for the particular problem that you've noticed, if that makes sense? And Andrew, after I've come to you, Marvin, I'd love to come back to you as well and think about how do people really work out what is the best solution for the problem that they see? So Andrew, to you first, please.
Thanks, Jesse. Yeah, so I think for us, this is a next step on a long journey of the church. I've only been at the church for 2 years, but for the 20 years that the church has been around, it's always had a drive to be working with people on the margins of society, helping people to reintegrate meaningfully, to give them a community and a relational network to help scaffold them back into a independent way of life. And through that, one of the ways that the church has done this for 20 years is by trying to help encourage people back into employment, by trying to pick specific bespoke projects in the church building that they can do. And through that, then we've been able to offer 1 or 2 jobs. And through that, and so I get what I'm trying to say is that we didn't start with the desire to house somebody. We start with the desire to make a meaningful impact on people's lives, reintegrating into society. And housing has become the obvious next step for us, really, because for this individual who's become, the life of the church is really central to their day-to-day life, and affordable housing there is impossible. It just seemed like a no-brainer to us, but it wasn't where we started. It's the fruit of 20 years of work.
Thank you, Andrew. And Marvin, how do you know when you're building affordable houses, how do you know that you're meeting the right need? How do you go about trying to make sure that you have a solution that really meets that need? You're on mute, Marvin.
That's a bit more of a challenging, for me to answer, because I have such a helicopter view. Our commitment was to get the city building at least 2,000 homes a year, at least 800 of those affordable. Now, we've been hit quite hard by COVID and Brexit, so those numbers haven't been met. But what has happened by having big numbers, we've certainly focused minds and got lots of houses built, more than we would have if we'd set small targets. So we've had that, which ours has been about the helicopter views. But we've had, I guess what I could say is there have been some general principles that what we've said is that we want to build mixed communities. So Ed Robury has been involved in the scheme exactly with 6 different 10 years of housing. So I was asked in cabinet today, why don't you just make 100% of the homes affordable on this big site? I said, well, we don't necessarily want 100% affordable homes in one place of council houses, right? Because you end up with a council house concentration. We'd like some council houses next to some key worker houses, next to market sale houses. So we're getting mixed communities. You get that internal mentoring rather than ghettos of people who can't afford to live in houses, and then ghettos of people who can, buy big houses. That takes some bravery, because it means, because the romantic line is 100% affordable. So I guess in my sense of what the city needs is we operate with those general principles. And then it's up to, but that's on our delivery, but and in our partnerships. But there are other people who are a lot closer to the ground who are getting real good things done that are about needs. So again, but you're involved. The Z-Pod scheme, for example, and I see Ben on the call as well from the YMCA. 11 homes in a piece on a car park for young people at risk of homelessness. That is meeting their need, but that's with very local expertise, with Ben's expertise about what's going on for young people and the expertise of housing delivery, an appreciation from Bristol Housing Festival, the need to build community, and it's all built into it. So you have those broader systemic principles, but with local expertise for specific housing developments as well. As about as close as I can get to that.
No, that's really helpful. Thank you, Marvin. So to move us on again onto a little slightly different tangent, Rebecca, I'm going to come back to you. There's been a question about lack of land, and how actually land is a huge part of the issue when we come to look at affordable housing. And the question is, how can the National Church release more buildings for land and for development? And from your perspective, having worked on this programme for the last little while and working with 7 different churches, and linked to that as well, there's a question around, is it only one denomination that's involved in this, or is it across different churches? So I'm going to leave you with those 2 rather major questions.
Also, your last question is the easiest one. I think it's definitely about cross-denominational. It's not, it's not a Church of England issue. And the churches that were involved with us on the scheme, the Innovative Solutions, weren't all Church of England. But I think in terms of what the National Church can do, feels like a bit of a red herring. I know that sounds really insane, but I think it's about communities and being close to people that will benefit from things. And actually, I think that's where the power lies. I think local church leaders, people who have a role in the church and a voice, can do something about that. I think the National Church, it's a massive machine, isn't it? It's kind of you'd be doing land audits and and in the end, you still got to get the local people to do something about it and to understand what is a good solution. So for me, that's where it starts. I think it's all about community-led approaches. So yeah, I wouldn't look at National Church, I would look locally and look at ourselves and what we can do.
That's really helpful. So in terms of thinking more locally and thinking with the communities that exist around churches and church buildings, Rowena, may I come to you and then follow that up with Bill and Andrew? But I'd love to hear about how you maybe got involved with how the local community got involved with your project, or how you were able to engage them, if at all, even in the sense of kind of planning consultancies and that kind of thing. How did that look for you in your project?
Yeah, thank you. So I think in many ways it sort of started a step back with the last question, but one about sort of identifying the needs, really. And it starts with hearing the stories, listening to the stories of the people who are actually on the ground, and that actually shapes understanding what the needs are and what the projects are. So in our very specific context, we're aware of where there is a housing need, and equally we're aware of what the housing need isn't. So we know, for example, that here in Blackburn, provision for street sleepers, there is actually quite a lot of that provision. Now, you may say, well, it's not ideal, the provision that's there isn't great, but actually that is something where other groups are really targeting that issue. And so it wouldn't be helpful for us just to wade in and try and do that on a totally different tack. But we know that there is a particular gap around people who have recently been given asylum status. We hear their stories. We hear the stories of people in the refugee process, or people who've been granted asylum, who've ended up in houses in multiple occupation which aren't safe, with unscrupulous landlords. We listen to those stories, and we listen to them respectfully. And as we hear those stories, we understand what the need is. So from that very basic grassroots level it starts. And then actually it's been about developing partnerships with those individuals themselves, but also with the umbrella organisations that already work to support them. So in our context, working together both with housing associations and partnerships in that direction, but also with the people who provide day-to-day services, non-residential, for those seeking asylum or who've been granted refugee status. So the Befriender projects, the English language projects, all of those, actually those are people who have a handle on the community and understand what the needs are, and also with a view to supported living in the future. So it's lots of different levels.
Bill, I saw you nodding along at points there. Was there something you wanted to add, or anything you can share from your experience?
Well, I think, that I would totally agree with that. I think local groups understand their own community. There is no one solution fits all. Keswick is a town where there's very low unemployment, but most of the jobs are hospitality or the retail industry, and so they are quite low paid. They're just above the minimum, the legal minimum in many cases. So we worked out that in order to buy the average house in Keswick, you needed a family income of £70,000, which was beyond the ability of most people in Keswick. So yes, I was in association to advise us on our first property, our first project, and then in partner with them. So, but we control our allocation. We have our own allocation policy, which we do the interviewing and so on. We didn't farm it out to a housing association. So I would certainly advocate that a local community land trust is the way forward.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Graham, coming back to you, thinking about the community, if somebody is an individual that happens to be part of a community or part of a community church, their church might not be getting involved in a particular build project, but how does somebody as an individual get involved? How do they support this? How do they, if they're a particular Christian, how does that work for them? What's the best advice you could give an individual?
Yeah, I think there's a number of things you could say. One is, well, we all have a home, whether we own that home, whether we rent it. We have a home, and we can think about how we use that home. And it might be some of us own more than one home. If you are a landlord, I think there is that's a kind of Christian calling to kind of take care of a home, to look after it, to make sure that your tenants are well looked after, that the house is in good condition, to actually see your ownership of a home as owning something which is given to us in trust. I mean, one of the things about a doctrine of creation tells us that nothing we have is ultimately ours anyway. Even if we're home owners, we're, if you like, leased those things by God. We are the kind of tenants who look after them. And so I think that's one thing. So if we own a home, one thing that can be happening, there are charities like Night Stop, for example, that is do a brilliant job of enabling people just to take in someone who's recently become homeless for a night or two, just to enable them to kind of get back on their feet and have a bit of respite. My daughter's been involved in that, and that's one example, simple example of how you can use your own home. If you own a second home, if you're a landlord, view that as part of your spiritual responsibility. And then the third thing is, I think, just getting people in your church. It might be just a handful of people in your church that could say, okay, can we find out what are the real kind of housing needs in our local area? And that might mean sort of knocking on some doors around the local streets, just being able to ask people, are there particular housing issues that you have here? Maybe doing some research on your local area to work out what are the real kind of housing issues. What is it? Is it rent that is too high? Is it lack of affordability? Is it overcrowding? Whatever that might be, and find something that you can do. One of our churches here has a fantastic example of once every week. It's now developed into a huge well, they do a food bank for quite some time, but they have a sort of drop-in centre. They liaise with local police liaison officer, mental health support, and housing officers from the local community. So people can know they can drop in at 3 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon, and they can get access to people who can give them advice on their housing. And that, again, is a few people in their local church thinking, what can we do about housing need in a local area? So those are some of the things I think that can be done.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Graham. Now, we are making our way through our time quite quickly, and I am shortly going to point to each of our panelists and ask for any kind of final thoughts, any sort of final statements you might have, any points you'd like to highlight or just kind of reiterate. But before we do that, we have a little more time for a couple more questions. And Rebecca, I'd like to come back to you, if I may, with a little bit more of the kind of practicals again. So looking at a few questions that have come in around what if we've got land, and what's our kind of first step? What do we do? How do we start thinking about what we do with it and how we use it? And then alongside that, there's another question around, have there been examples of projects that have deliberately involved future tenants in their development of those solutions? And obviously Andrew has one example of that he may be able to add to, but are there any other examples that you know?
Oh, sure. So we'll do the examples one first. I think Andrew's is a great example. There are other projects where people who are working with people that would benefit from the accommodation have been involved, and that's quite common. So Rowena's done that in Blackburn, for example. I'm trying to think of other examples, actually. I can think of more ways to do it than examples that come to mind, because working with churches isn't something that we do every day. So, but it's entirely possible, I think, to run workshops that include people that may benefit from it. I think it can be slightly difficult to run it with people who are definitely going to benefit from it. It can be a bit divisive and it's hard to predict. But community-led housing is a great example for that Bill was referring to. Your first question about if a church has got a bit of land and where to start. I feel like I'm repeating myself, but I would really be looking at actually what a community is struggling with. How can that best be used? How can it best be shared?
Oh, we may have lost Rebecca. Give a couple more seconds, see if she pops back. Well, whilst her internet is resetting, Andrew, can I come to you? Is there anything you wanted to add on your specific example?
Yeah, well, you know, it is probably a bit easier for us in terms of that we have an individual that we want to provide affordable housing for. And so it's been very easy to involve him in the process and design on what kind of housing would suit the individual. I think the one thing I would say is that in some senses, for us, we didn't start with a desire to enter into housing. We started with a clear idea of what, as a church, we were driving towards. We wanted to work with specific people groups and specific niches of the community, and our desire to enter housing follows those individuals. And I think I would just encourage that housing is all about people, and in the local community there'll probably be more need than churches can meet. And so make sure you have a clear vision, or that the housing that you want to be a part of creating aligns with a bigger vision that the whole church is bought into, that it's not something separate, but it's actually core to the identity of what the church is about. And that hopefully will afford a greater buy-in. And actually, if the community knows that that's already part of your vision and you're active in it, I think that will garner better support, because it makes sense that you would create housing for these kind of people because you're already working with them.
Brilliant. That's really helpful. Thank you. I'm going to ask one final question before I come to each of the panelists for a kind of sum up, if that makes sense. And I'd love to come back to you, Graham, and just ask there's a question in the box there. Just how urgent is the problem from the view of the church, from the Archbishop of Canterbury's commission? All things being equal, what would a proportional and measurable response be if the church centrally and churches individually responded in a timescale that's appropriate? So we're looking at, how urgent really is the Church of England viewing the problem of the housing crisis?
Well, I think a measurement of that is that the Archbishop of Canterbury decided that the first commission he wanted to set up was about housing. He wrote a book a number of years ago called Vision for Britain, which is a kind of an idea of what would Britain look like if shaped by the kind of values of Christian faith that have been part of this nation for years. It's got a number of different chapters on a lot of different issues within our society, but the one he chose, as the first thing he wanted to address was to drill down into was precisely this one of housing. And that says something about his priorities. It also says something about our priorities as a church, in the sense that I think what we will see, as the commission launches, is a particular emphasis upon this area, and it's an opportunity for us to explore it, to kind of take it seriously as a church. And I think, what would a proportional, measurable response be? When we think about the church, we think about one thing, but of course the church is many different things. It's the church commissioners on a kind of broad scale, and the land and property that's owned by the church commissioners, individual dioceses. This is the Church of England, that is, and there's individual local churches. And of course, there are local churches of all kinds of denominations. And one thing we are quite well off on in the church in this country is buildings. We have got quite a bit of buildings, and we have got quite a bit of land. And therefore, I think the challenge for us as a church is, how do we use those buildings? How do we use those lands? Not just to keep our own show on the road, not just to enable churches to grow and to thrive. And yes, we need to do that. But how can we use them creatively to address one of the major crises in our nation that's affecting so many people around our country, which is precisely this housing crisis, or the different housing crises that we find across our country. So I think what we're longing to see at all those different levels, church commissioners levels, diocese level, local church levels, and even individual levels, there's something for all of us to be involved in. I think just one more last thing I'd say, we've got our 5 values there, our sort of 5 S's, if you like, as to what good housing looks like. We've added a 6th S, which doesn't really describe housing, but it's something without which the housing crisis will not be solved, and that is sacrifice. And we know as Christians that resurrection doesn't come without death. This will not come without sacrifice, and that sacrifice on behalf of everybody. At the moment, that sacrifice is paid largely by people at the receiving end of the housing crisis, those in unaffordable, unsuitable housing. Now, if we all share something of that sacrifice, landowners, developers, housing associations, government, whatever it might be, all of us share that sacrifice, we can actually do something about this housing crisis. And I think part of the call on us as the church is to do the part we can to set up those kind of prophetic signs, if you like, of the coming kingdom of God in addressing housing need in our local areas.
Yes, that's a really powerful. Thank you so much, Graham. I'd like to just run around the panel for any kind of final comments. Marvin, can I start with you?
Just as we've been saying all night, just how central housing is to our country's future, right? For social justice, but also our planetary responsibilities. It's worth bearing in mind as we lead into COP26 in Edinburgh at the end of this year, when we're talking about having 10 years to get it right on climate and biodiversity, species loss. But again, that housing will very much underpin the physical shape and the systems that we require to run our cities. And if we get it wrong, it's going to be a problem, because houses are with us for hundreds of years. But therein is an incredible opportunity to bring forward housing and housing solutions that meet those challenges. Just something as well that I've repeated quite often that Graham said at the beginning, which I loved as one of the qualities. We can also contribute to the discussion about what housing is for, what it means. And I'll never forget just him pointing out that in a housing, you need to have the ability to be hospitable. Again, these are not just boxes. In its very nature, human dignity, forming human relationships. And I've shared that insight a number of times with developers and with housing officers, and they love it when you just point that out. There's so much more than just putting bricks on bricks, or even MMC walls pinned to NMMC walls. You're doing something that has meaning. And when I shared with developers just how much responsibility they had, the scale of public leadership that is now on their shoulders, I think it was both a challenge, but I think it also was a lift to them to just think, not just evil developers coming in and running off with a profit, but they have such a huge responsibility for shaping the way our cities and our towns work in the future.
Thank you so much. Rebecca?
I think the only thing I want to say is if there's a stirring in your gut about all this, do something about it. Like, use what your natural instincts are. Go research, go volunteer, go and speak to people, go and hear what's going on, and just immerse yourself in it. And I think naturally then you start making the connections and finding ways to respond. That's it.
Thank you. Rowena?
I think that responding to housing needs is about doing something really transformative. It's not a vanity project. And because of that, sometimes there's a need to compromise or to change what you thought your original plan was going to be. And that's not a problem. That actually, if you're flexible and you change as you understand the needs more and you understand the resources more, then something even more transformative, more exciting, more helpful to people who really need it can happen.
Thank you. Andrew?
Yeah, I think something that I've really appreciated that's been shared and a really good reminder for me is how community is at the heart of housing. And I think as a church, we have such relational wealth when it comes to the community that we can form around people. And so obviously space has been mentioned, that the church doesn't have much space. Well, We've got car parks, and so the Z-Pod scheme here in Bristol is a great way you can put housing above space. A lot of church members have got big back gardens, maybe even one or two. You could probably put a house in there. Again, Housing Festival have got some examples of where people have done that. So, but the main thing that the church has is a relational support network where you can actually create families away from families for people. It's not just creating homes, it is, as so many people say, creating communities. And we're in a very good place to do that if we're intentional and keep that as a priority as to why we're creating housing.
Thank you. And Bill.
Could I just give an example of housing where the people who work on the houses then become homeowners, and that's Latch, which leads action to create homes. And that's exactly what they do. They repair disheveled buildings and make them really good quality buildings. They give training to people who could be out of work or in poorly paid jobs. They become carpenters, plasterers, electricians, and so on. And then they can apply for the houses that they've renovated. A really good scheme. And then back to me, I think I'm not entirely happy with the bishop's mention of sacrifice, because I think one of the things I would say about getting involved in affordable housing is how rewarding it can be. I've worked in production, bakery production management all my life. I've been in fantastic places. I've worked in Dublin, in Liverpool, here in Keswick, and even in the Caribbean for nearly 7 years. And some of those jobs were extremely well paid. But the most rewarding job I have ever had is being chairman of Keswick Community Housing Trust. So yes, there may be sacrifice, but I think there's tremendous reward in getting involved in trying to provide affordable homes. I would just like to say, yes, houses are a human need, but I think a basic affordable house is a human right, not just a human need. It's a right of everybody in this country to have a proper affordable home.
Thank you, Bill. If only we'd got to that point sooner, we could have a good kind of chew on some of those points. It could have been quite fun. But we are at 8 o'clock. So I want to start by thanking the panelists so much for your time, for your energy, for your engagement in this. I think that this is a real opportunity to celebrate some stuff going on around this country that is phenomenal and is a real kind of it's a real exemplar of where collaboration is starting to solve a need that we see in this nation, and it's a real, yeah, I'm really privileged to be part of this event, and I'm really privileged to be aware of what's going on here. So thank you so much to the panelists. If anyone else wants any kind of further information, do check out the link in the chat that is going to go up very shortly around the Housing Justice website. So there will be more information on there that you can look at. So at this point in the evening,